Hey everyone, Reid Henrichs with Ridge, and the purpose of today's video is to help shed some light on the Electoral College. What a timely video. Within the last week we've had our election of 2016. Of course this would apply for any election and has since the first one of George Washington all the way through Donald Trump as of recently. So I'm going to address some points about the Electoral College and hopefully explain it in a way that you can better understand it. Well, recently there's been calls to abolish the Electoral College, and this has happened more than one occasion where there have been calls to get rid of it, calling in an anachronism or it's archaic and it doesn't fit the needs of society. Well, I wholeheartedly disagree with that line of thinking. I think the Electoral College is a very unique and a very accurate way to elect a president of the United States. Those calling for the abolishment of the Electoral College do so under the guise of it's more democratic to have a popular vote or that it's somehow progress. This is wholeheartedly false. This is incorrect logic and reasoning. Democracy is not progress. Democracy is not evolution. It is devolution. It is going back. It is regressive. I want you guys to first and foremost look at the electoral map by county. If you look across this entire country, you will see a literal ocean of red with blue coastal areas and small islands of blue. This is a throwback to Bronze Age city-states that dominate the periphery around them. It was for very such reasons that the founders decided to put the Electoral College as our election mechanism. The founders understood a tendency towards urbanization and concentrated populations, and they did not want urban areas or larger states to dominate the political process in the United States. They wanted a much more broad election mechanism that would reflect the country as a whole rather than individualized thought process and ideologies. What the Electoral College is a compromise between large and small states. We see this also in our own Congress, whereas the House of Representatives is determined by a state's population. No matter the size of every state, they only have 2 senators. The Electoral College is still population-based. Big states have more influence over the election than the smaller ones do. For example, California has 55 electoral votes. If you take a state like Wyoming, it only has 3. The Electoral College also provides that a candidate must win many areas of the country, not just population centers. In any election, a candidate has to win not only some parts of the West Coast or the Northeast or the Midwest or the South, it has to have a well-rounded success rate with all of those areas. You can't just win one area of the country. If there was a direct election, a direct democratic election, a candidate would only have to focus on urban areas and say, forget the rest of the country. Not real democratic. Something that you have to take into consideration is that the United States is a constitutional republic. We are not a democracy. I am tired of these people using the word democracy. You will not find the word democracy in any of our founding documents. It's not in the Declaration of Independence. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in the Bill of Rights. In fact, the only time the founders mention democracy is in a derogatory manner, very critical of democracy, and at which point they say that it not only leads to tyranny, but that it is self-destructive. So our founders didn't use the word democracy in a very positive light at all. And before all you intellectuals out there try to get into these semantic arguments about, oh, well, what they really meant was, don't put words in the mouth. Just read their diaries, just read their journals, and just read our founding documents and stop spinning these threads into what you want it to look like. Another benefit of the Electoral College is that it suppresses voter fraud. Now I get it, there will always be voter fraud. In Chicago, the old joke is vote early and vote often. It's really hard to predict which states are going to turn an election, and I know that recently there's been emphasis on swing states, but I want you to consider that swing states do rotate. They're not always the same ones. As recently as 1988, California went Republican. You know, Texas had always been a Democrat stronghold until the last decade or two. So you have to understand, guys, that swing states don't always stay the same. The swing states of the last few elections will not be the same swing states in 20 years. It's constantly rotating around, so it's very hard to predict where it's going to matter the most. What this also forces candidates to do is campaign in many different areas of the country. Now I know that some of them ignore states like maybe North Dakota or a place like Alaska, for example. But overall, they do have to campaign not only in New England, as we looked at New Hampshire this time, but they also have to campaign in the Midwest and even in the South. Look at North Carolina. Look at Virginia. Look at Florida. So these candidates always have to go to many different areas of the country and campaign for people's votes. That, once again, is a much more inclusive way to do this than simply by doing it by population, at which point they would only visit major cities. The Electoral College is an overall good mechanism. It's only happened 5 times in our country's history, 2 in the last 16 years, in which the Electoral College has elected a president that did not win the popular vote. But I'm going to tell you this. The popular vote doesn't always reflect the nation as a whole. I want you all to consider something. I want you to consider that just because a candidate wins a popular vote, that does not reflect the country as a whole. What it does reflect is a certain place, i.e. California or New York or Chicago. All of these big cities where you have massive populations and people stacked on top of each other like rats, their way of life does not equate to everybody else's in this country. And just because they want something a certain way does not mean that we all have to live with their breadcrumbs. The founders knew this. They knew exactly that urban centralization was going to happen. And Thomas Jefferson warned against this on many different occasions, that the country would tend towards this. What he wanted was a nation of self-sufficient citizens. Does that describe anybody in the city to you? I have a lot of friends in the city. I get that they live there. But their way of life is vastly different than mine and anybody else that I know. And we are a republic made up of 50 independent, free states. They are sovereign. They have different ways of life. And I'm sorry, y'all out there in LA, and I've got a lot of students that I've trained out in LA, but for the rest of you out there, I want you to understand something. Your way of life does not dictate mine. If you found the information in the video helpful, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Facebook, that link is down below. And if you want to learn about our other freedoms, particularly the Second Amendment, come on out to Valor Ridge and we'll train you up on that physically as well as cerebrally. This is Reid Henrichs with Valor Ridge reminding you, the lessons that we learn are written on the tombstones of others. We'll see you on the ridge.